Thank you for joining us at Community on Demand. In recent years, American youth have been the target of social engineers who are introducing ideology designed to deconstruct their natural identities and self-image. Part of the strategy is to break down protective walls of social decency, moral boundaries, and parental protection that shield them from exploitation. Dan has titled today's sermon, Rebuilding Walls of Protection, taken from Nehemiah chapter 4, verses 1 through 4. In these passages, we will discover 3 courses of action Nehemiah took to rebuild broken down walls. This message was recorded during a live Sunday morning service at Community. Let's listen in as Dan begins.
Well, if you've been following the news here over the last couple of weeks, you already know that Target has been at the top of this news cycle over the last couple of weeks. So according to the New York Post and other news outlets, Target has lost over $14 billion in market capitalization. Plus, they have lost a considerable amount of retail sales, all centered around this controversial decision to overtly promote transgenderism among our children. And you say, "Oh, that's horrible, that's horrible." Well, what most people don't know is that, according to the Post, Target has donated $2.1 million to an activist organization called GLSEN. You might say, what is GLSEN? Well, GLSEN is the leading activist organization that encourages identity confusion and gender transitioning in public schools. Right now, this organization has 4,000 chapters across the United States in public schools promoting their agenda. Now, you say, well, exactly what are they promoting? What are they doing? Well, one of the things that GLSEN is doing is they're urging teachers and school administrators to not let parents know when their children are beginning to have identity confusion and beginning to think about transitioning. In fact, they actually go in and teach teachers and administrators to use the transitioned or the transgender identifying name of the child that's beginning to leaning that direction at school. But when talking to the parents, use their dead name. That sends red and yellow flags up when an adult is saying, now don't tell your parents what we're doing. Right? So, here is part of their vision statement. GLSEN is focused on integrating gender ideology on all levels of K through 12, from curriculum to district policy. These organized activists are in our public schools, training our public teachers, training our public school administrators how to slip in gender ideology to our kids and confuse them as they're growing up, and putting a wedge between parents and our children. They vandalized and broken down the walls of parental protection around our children in public schools. We send them to public schools to get an education, and that's where our walls of protection are being broken down, and they promote gender ideology and confusion. I don't know about you guys, but as a parent and a grandparent and a pastor, I just cannot stand by and keep silent when I've got a platform to speak on things of this nature. I'm sorry, this is not the popular thing to do in a church on Sunday morning. We ought to be easy and nice and things like that, but we are in a cultural war right now, folks. And what we've got to do is we've got to begin to learn how to be reactionary. Thank you. I'm not going to go in that direction, you know. But it bothers me when corporate giants fund and promote the predatory behavior of organized activists who are, catchphrase word, targeting our kids and our grandchildren to destroy their identities and damage their self-esteem. You know what we do here at Community? We do criminal background checks, fingerprinting, and vetting of individuals who work with our children, both in our church and in our preschool. Because we do not want predators around our kids. And we will do everything we can to keep them away from our kids, to damage their self-esteem and their identities. It's crazy people. They're out there breaking these walls down. You know, I'm going to be in the book, you probably guessed this, I'm going to be in the book of Nehemiah today. We're kind of in a building program, getting ready to kick off, and it kind of fits together. But in ancient Israel, there was a time when the protective walls around that city were being vandalized and broken down, leaving the people of that city exposed to predators who were going in and exploiting them. In fact, there's a psalm that addresses this period during that time in Israel. It's actually Psalm 80, verse 12, talking about Jerusalem and their walls being broken down. And here's what it says. Why have you broken down the hedges? That's literally the walls, if you look it up. Why have you broken down her, Jerusalem's walls, so that those who passed by the way pluck her fruit? Again, the protective walls around Jerusalem have been broken down, and people were living in distress because of these predators, exploiters that are coming in freely into the city and taking advantage of them. Fortunately, there was one man living 900 miles away in Persia, which is modern day Iran, who could not stand by and say nothing or do nothing. And his name was Nehemiah. And what he found out about these broken down walls and the exploitation and the distress of the people, he said, I've got to do something. So immediately he went into action and devised 3 courses of action in order to address the broken down walls and the distress that the people were in. He discovered, he decided, he developed. Let's kind of outline the first couple of chapters of the book of Nehemiah. Turn with me, if you would, to Nehemiah chapter 1, verse number 1. I'm going to read a kind of a lengthy passage of scripture here, just to kind of get the setting of Nehemiah 1, 1 through 3. Here, Nehemiah discovers something. He discovers the predicament that the people of Israel and Jerusalem are in. Let's read together. The words of Nehemiah, the son of Hakaliah. It came to pass in the month of Chislev, in the 20th year, that I was at Shushan the citadel, and Hananiah, one of my brethren, came with men from Judah, and I asked them concerning the Jews who had escaped and who had survived the captivity, and concerning Jerusalem. And they said to me, the survivors who are left from the captivity in the province are there in great distress and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem is also broken down, and the gates are burned with fire. Now, Nehemiah was in a pretty good situation. He was a Jewish man serving on the staff of the Persian king. In fact, a very close servant to the king. Saw him personally every day, kind of protected his life. He lived in sort of a protective bubble. Nobody's going to get to him. He's not going to have any trouble. He's well fed. He's well taken care of in the Persian palace. But he was clueless as what was really going on in Jerusalem, about the oppression and the distress of his people in Israel. Let me give you a little history lesson in case you are not familiar with this particular time in Israel. But about 140 years before Nehemiah, the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, had come into Jerusalem, had sieged the city, had broken down the walls, had burned the gates with fire, had destroyed the temple, and taken many people into captivity. And it had been like 140 years, and a lot of people had forgotten about it. But the temple was gone. The walls were broken down. The people were in distress. Well, Ezra came back in and built the temple, rebuilt the temple. But still, the walls had not been rebuilt. And people were living in a very desperate situation, being oppressed by all the neighbors that were around. When Nehemiah discovered the predicament in Jerusalem, he was deeply impacted emotionally. Look at the next verse there, verse 4. So it was, when I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for many days. When he discovered the distress of his people, it hit him. He began to imagine what was going on, and he was deeply impacted. He was mourning because of that. Godly leaders like Nehemiah are driven by something. They're driven by compassion, concern, and care over people that are struggling in distress. Godless people seem to be driven by contempt, condemnation, and control, and a lack of care. And Nehemiah was a godly leader. He may have been one of the great leaders. I think he was one of the great leaders of the Old Testament. But he didn't know what was going on. And when he began to discover what was going on, it hit him like a ton of bricks. And that's why I have to expose things to you as a congregation, because the news media and our politicians and other organizations they don't want you to know what you need to know. And someone has to say it. And we've decided we're going to do that here, where we're not going to keep silent. So he discovered their predicament. He was impacted. Second thing he did is he decided to pray. I love this about this man. Verse number 4. I was fasting and praying before the God of heaven. When Nehemiah discovers the predicament, he doesn't get angry and throw a fit, and he will later. I mean, later on, he'll even pull his hair out and pull other people's hair out. But right now, it's pretty calm, you know. The first thing that he did is he prayed. Every time he came to a decision, he would pray. In fact, if you start counting the words pray and prayer in that first couple of verses of Scripture there, you will count that he used that word 7 times. He was focused on prayer. God, I need to do something. God, we need help. God. And he prayed. And in that prayer, I think it's really important because he begins with confession. He confesses his transgression and Israel's transgressions. And then he cites God's promises to Moses. He goes back to Deuteronomy and he says, God, now you promised if we would turn back to you that you'd bring us back in the land. And so he's citing that promise. But then the third thing that he does is he has this question. He said, he asked for mercy from this man. What man is he talking about? He's talking about the king of Persia. So he's got something on his mind. I need mercy from this man. Nehemiah is praying that the king of Persia will give him the resources that he needs to do something about the broken down walls and the distressed people of Israel. So the first thing, he discovers the predicament. He prays about the situation, and then he begins to develop a plan. He's thinking about this plan. And as we continue to read there in chapter 2, verse 4, it says, then the king said to me, now, here's the background. He's praying, he's fasting, he's sad. You're not to be that way in front of the king. When you get in front of the king, you've got to be happy to make him happy. He doesn't want you Making him sad. Yeah, he doesn't want you making him sad. And so Nehemiah was sad, and he's getting ready to go before the king. The king says, "What's going on, man? You're worrying me. You've got this look on your face that I don't like." And so he said, "Well, and here's the situation." Then the king said to me, "What do you want? What do you request?" So I prayed to the God of heaven, and I said to the king, "If it please the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, I ask that you send me to Judah, to the city of my fathers, that I may rebuild it." Did you notice what he did just after the king asked him, "What do you need?" He does a real quick prayer. "Okay, Lord, help me have the right words." Okay, and he's praying under his breath, and then he begins to make the ask. Here's the ask, the big ask: "Would you please send me to Jerusalem to rebuild those walls?" So let's continue to read. And the king is kind of thinking about it, and he jumps in with some more of an ask. "Furthermore, I said to the king, if it pleases the king, let letters be given to me for the governors of the region beyond the river, that they must permit me to pass through till I come to Judah, and a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he might give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel, which pertains to the temple, for the city wall, and for the house that I need to build for myself when I get there, that I'll occupy." See, Nehemiah knows the capacity of the king. He's the king of the world. Artaxerxes owns everything. And so first of all, he asked him if he can go. And then he knows his power and his financial capacity. So he asked for two things. Number one, permission to go, royal authorization on the trip. He's got permits to get there. And then building materials for the construction of the project of this 2.5 mile, 40-foot high fence that has been broken down around Jerusalem. I mean, he's ready. He's been thinking about it. He's measured it in his mind. He has vision. And he is praying. And he knows what to ask for. Nehemiah's a great leader. He discovered the predicament. He decided to pray. He developed a plan to authorize, finance, and build the protective walls around the people of Israel. We're kind of like Nehemiah this morning. We live in a protective bubble. Do you realize that? We hear about the border crisis. We don't really see the border crisis here. We hear about the murders and crimes downtown. We don't really see it out here. We have pretty good schools and teachers in our area, thanks to oversight people that watch it here in Montgomery County. So we don't see all of the things that are going out there. We live in a bubble. And like Nehemiah, we need to have compassion and care about what's going on in our country and what's happening to our kids and what's confusing our kids as they're trying to get an education so they'll be literate in the world, and they're getting indoctrination instead of an education. We really need to have care. And we need to realize that we are living in an exciting time, but a perilous time. We're living in a time where the moral and biblical and rational walls around our children are being breached and broken down. So what do we do? I mean, we're all on the same page here. We're like, yeah, go, Pastor Dan, go, but what do we really do? How do we stem the tide? How do we build back the walls that have been broken down? What do we do in the church in the center of the Woodlands here in this area in the state of Texas? What do we do? Let me give you 3 things, and we might get out early. Number one. Let me get a drink of water here. We must survey the vandalism, the damage, the breach. Look at verse 11. This is Nehemiah narrating here. So I came to Jerusalem and was there 3 days. Then I arose in the night, and a few men with me. I told no one what my God had put on my heart to do at Jerusalem. Nor was there any animal with me except the one on which I rode. And I went out at night through the valley gate to the serpent well and to the refuge gate, and I viewed the walls of Jerusalem, which were broken down, and the gates which were burned with fire. Nehemiah heard his people tell him what had happened, but he's going to make a personal assessment. He's not going to tell anybody. He doesn't want to overwhelm anyone. So what he does is he gets up at night, gets on a horse, rides down around the city and assesses the damage. If you continue to read this passage, we just don't have time to do it all, but if you continue to read, the refuse and the debris was so massive that he had to get off of his horse and he had to climb over the trash and the refuge and the dump for him to just get up and see the damage that had been done to the walls of the city. If I had been Nehemiah that night, I would have been overwhelmed. I would have said, there's no way we can clear this off. There's no way we can build the walls back. I think he probably prayed. It doesn't say that, but he said, God, you're going to have to help me here. And he surveys the damage of what had been done as he begins to continue his plan on how to move forward. You know, there's a new term going around today. It's called gender dysphoria. GD. It is a term that's been tossed around to describe those who are struggling with identity confusion. Sometimes I don't know who I am, identity confusion. But this identity confusion is being promoted by new social engineers that are, again, getting into our public education and confusing kids and getting to think, well, maybe I am a boy named Sue, Maybe I need to rethink things. Yeah. Come on, keep and promoting it. Well, let me give you some true facts here. According to several reports, a staggering 32 to 50% of those diagnosed with GD attempt suicide. We're talking about kids that are encouraged toward identity confusion. They attempt suicide. And 26% resort to substance abuse just to be able to cope. Do you realize that initially Satan used identity confusion and self-image questioning when he tempted and deceived Eve in the Garden of Eden? He came to her and he began talking with her and... Do I use the word? No. No. He began talking to her and pushing her in a direction, and then he slips the question in, and he says, is it okay to eat? It's okay. Because if you eat the fruit, God knows you will be like him. That is a sly way to say you are not created in the image of God. He knows it. He's keeping you from it. I'm confusing your identity because I'm about to take you down. That's been his technique since the beginning of time. And now what's happening is that places like Target are promoting it among our schools. Identity confusion. When you eat, you'll be like God, implying that you're not like God. He continues to use it. So what we must do is we've got to survey the damage. What's happening to our kids? What is this movement doing? What it has done to our kids? Our theme here at Community with our youth department, we've been pushing it and working it. Our theme, and we just handed out a bunch of T-shirts to our kids this morning. We got about 15 back there this morning, by the way, if you want to know. Our theme with our kids is transformed youth, not transitioned youth. We want to see our kids transform their minds, be transformed by the renewing of their minds through the Word of God. So we've got to look and see what's happening. We've got to dig down into it. We've got to see what our kids are struggling with and what's been promoted, so that we can be able to come in and transform them and lift them up and give them the freedom that they need to have a transformed mind. Number 2, we must support the vision. Let's continue reading, verse 17. Then I said to them, you see the distress that we are in, and how Jerusalem lies waste, and its gates are burned with fire. Come and let's build the wall of Jerusalem. And I think he said it just like that. That we may no longer be a reproach. And I told them of the hand of my God, which had been good upon me, and also of the king's word he had spoken to me. Nehemiah was a visionary leader who had the vision of rebuilding the protective walls around the city of Jerusalem. He could see it. He could visualize it. He could see the colors of it. And he pulled the people together and he cast the vision and he said, let's build the walls. What did they say? Nah, we're not going to build a... No. Look down at verse number 18. So they said, let's rise up and build. Then they set their hands to do the good work. If you want to be a leader, you've got to cast the vision. You've got to catch the vision. You've got to support the vision. One of the things that we've been doing is we've actually been promoting our youth ministry and promoting our building program here, is that we've been throwing we've been trying to paint the vision, paint the picture, let you see it. Kenny built a model out there. We're trying to let you catch the vision. So let me repeat part of the vision so you can catch it. Here at Community, our vision is a dynamic youth program, a creative and exciting children's ministry, and a clean, secure, and safe nursery. Our construction sign, they wanted to put our construction sign, and they sent it to me for approval, and it said, addition. And I said, no. That's not what it's going to say. What's it going to say? It's going to say, youth expansion project. Let's rise up and build a youth expansion project. Okay. They put it out there because we want it to, it's out here. It's going to be a bigger one out here. And people driving by are going to say they care. They have compassion. They're looking at our youth. Here's a place we can bring our youth. It's going to be exciting, folks. It's going to be exciting. As leaders in our community, and in our church, we must catch and cast the vision of transformed youth by promoting, supporting, encouraging, and building up our vision for the youth in our community in all areas. Preschool, elementary, teenagers. That's the target. That's who they're targeting. That's who we target to protect. So we must survey the vandalism, support the vision, and then we must strengthen our voices. Let's go down to verse 19. But when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, and Geshem the Arab heard of it, they laughed at us and despised us and said, what is this thing you are doing? Will you rebel against the king? Evil people tried to stop Nehemiah with shame, ridicule, lies, threats, activism, propaganda, anything they could use and throw at him, they did it. And that's the way evil works. So what did you do, Nehemiah? Did you go back to Persia? Well, let's read verse number 20. So I answered them, and I said to them, the God of heaven himself will prosper us. Therefore, we, his servants, will arise and build. So you have no heritage or right or memorial in Jerusalem. Now that's telling them something. In response, Nehemiah speaks up and speaks out against these evil activists. And he involves himself in organizing, leading, and building the wall. And he will accomplish this vision in a staggering short amount of time, 52 days. Unbelievable. 52 days. Our vision is for transformed youth. Would you put this next slide up there, Clint? I want them to see. Next week, and I'm not trying to steal Clint's thunder here, but you're going to see a lot of our teenagers wearing these transformed youth signs next week. He'll tell you what's going to happen. But you're going to be seeing it because we want our kids to catch the vision of transformation. We want it to spread into our community, into our schools. We want to see a transformation that will spread like wildfire throughout our community. We're not just building a youth expansion project. We are building protective walls of doctrinal truth, moral values, and biblical principles around our kids, around our children and teens to strengthen their identities, to build up their self-images, and to transform their lives. This is our responsibility. Already, I know I'm preaching to the crowd. Every one of you could agree, but I know that I'm preaching to the choir here. But let me just say this. Many of you have already caught the vision. I mean, you talk to me, and you're excited. You know, many of you have given sacrificially to the project. We've raised a good deal of cash back there. Last week, in my sermon, I mentioned that in a short period of time that we had already, in just like less than a week, as we begin to launch our bond program, that we were able to issue $720,000 in church bonds. Man, that was good. But before I could get the words out of my mouth, we jumped up to nearly $1 million. We forgot to post it this morning. We're over $922,000, and even could be up to $1 million by this morning that we have issued in church bonds. So we've got about 400 or so to go. Many of you have given, you've invested, you've promoted, you supported the vision of transformed youth. And there are going to be Tobias and Sanballats and Gishems out there, and they deserve those names. They will ridicule us. They will lie about us. They will threaten and do everything to stop us from accomplishing the vision of strengthening the identities of our kids and leading a multitude of kids to the Lord. We just need to support, strengthen, survey the damage, support the vision, strengthen our voices and vision to build this wall, transform youth. Once upon a time, there was a prince who fell in love with a fair young maiden. And he was planning his wedding. He was so excited until the enemy came along and captured the fair young maiden, took her off to a far land and up into a tower and wouldn't let her go. And so the handsome young prince devised a plan to rescue his fair young maiden. And so what he did is he recruited two of his small little creatures to help him. He recruited, first of all, Claude Caterpillar. And Claude was a kind of a crusty little old guy, you know. And he said, here's what I'm going to do. At 5 o'clock on a certain day, I'm going to be at the bottom of the tower. I want you to go to the fair young maiden, tell her to be ready, and tell her to jump into my arms when I'm there. So Claude said, okay, I got it. So he starts crawling along toward the tower. And the sun came up and began to beat down on him. And he was kind of a chubby little fellow anyway. And he had on a nice suit and everything. And he began to sweat. And he said, why does the sun have to be out on a day like this when I've got to work so hard? Couldn't it just be a cool breeze? And why in the world? And just grumbled and grumbled and grumbled as he crawled along. Then all of a sudden, clouds came up. And it started raining. And he said, good grief. Why does it have to rain like this? I mean, I just got my suit pressed, and here's all this mud, and I'm having trouble, and here's all this water, and I mean, just griped and griped and griped and griped. He got to the bottom of the tower, and he said, how am I going to get up there? I mean, whose plan was this anyway? But he noticed a vine that went up the tower, and he said, okay, I think I'm up for the job. And he starts crawling up the vine. But as it would be, the vine was a rose bush with thorns, and as he was crawling along, all you could hear is ouch, 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 until he gets up to the top, and he whirls himself over to the ledge of the window, and he jumps in, and he starts looking around, and he sees this lady, and he said, "So are you the fair young maiden?" And she nodded her head. He said, "I don't know what the handsome young prince sees in you, and to know that I have gone all this way and worked all this time just to get up here to tell you and to give you a message. Well, here's the message. He's coming. Get ready. 5 o'clock, jump. I'm out of here." And he left. Well, then, his other little friend was Barney the butterfly. And Barney was a little bit afraid of the rain, because the storm was up and the wind. But Barney got enough courage, and he spread his wing and was lifted up in the air, and the wind blew him back and forth, and he fought the rain and fought the wind and flew to the tower. And just as he saw the tower and began to fly up to the level of the tower, a bird comes sweeping along and almost grabs him, and he ducks. And after a chase back and forth around the tower, he finally slips into to the chamber where the fair young maiden is, and is exhausted. And she lifts her finger up. And Barney the butterfly flies over to the finger of the fair young maiden, and she puts him up like this. And he said, "Are you the fair young maiden?" And he said, "Yes." And she said, "Yes." He said, "You are so beautiful. I can see why he has gone to so much trouble to rescue you. He loves you so much. He has got a grand plan. He is coming to rescue you. Tomorrow at 5 o'clock, I want you to be standing here. And when you hear your hero's voice, just jump, and he will catch you and carry you off to Never Never Land." Is that where they're going to go? She said, "Oh, great." And she goes to get ready, and she stops. And she says, "That was a wonderful message. But, you know the guy that came in here earlier? You know the little caterpillar guy that came in here? He's kind of crusty. He's kind of angry. Can you tell me what's wrong with him? I mean, he delivered the same message, but in such a horrible way." And Barney said, "Oh, you're talking about Claude, the caterpillar." "Yes, that's him." And Barney said, "Oh, that's just Claude. I used to be like him until I was transformed." Our vision is for transformed youth. We need everybody to get on board. Many of you gotten on board. We're going to get this building built, and people are going to hear about us, and people are going to flood in here. We're going to need teachers and workers and mentors, and many of you are already doing that. We've got some guys in the back right now that are mentoring our young men, doing a fabulous job. We're going to have to give I hope that we have to get so full that we're going to say, okay, I hate to say this, but we're going to have to build some more, you know. You know, guys, God has commissioned us. So let me give you some things in closing. Number one, pray for our children and teens every day. For our kids, our community kids, and the kids that are out there. Number two, support our youth ministries by encouraging our kids to participate in Sunday school, youth camp, and activities. These things don't sound like fun. You want to go to Sunday school? That doesn't sound like fun. You want to go to summer camp, Christian camp? It doesn't sound like fun until they get there. And they love it. Activities. 3, participate in working, teaching, volunteering in our youth ministry. Number 4, speak up. Speak out against the Tobiahs and the Sanballats of this world. Don't take it sitting down. Speak up. Speak out. Because these people try to shame, ridicule, criticize, and exploit our kids. We must give our hearts to this. We must have compassion. This is our last stand. The Lord is coming. We have a responsibility to the next generation coming up. Let's join in this together.
On behalf of Pastor Dan and the folks at Community, thank you for joining us today at Community on Demand. Feel free to share this link with others, and please know you are always welcome to be our guest during a live service any Sunday morning at our campus in the Woodlands, Texas. For more information, just click on the link, www.cbcwoodlands.org. I hope you will again join us at Community on Demand.